Hi there. My name is Ben Rains, and I serve as the program coordinator for financial education at the Student Life Student Wellness Center. So I manage a program called Scarlet Financial, which is a financial education program for students at Ohio State. So today we're going to talk a little bit about your financial transition from living on campus to living off campus, how to kind of think about your expenses, some tips to think forward about a budget for next year, some resources that are available to you as students, and then find some tips and tricks for making a harmonious journey off campus. So my program, Scarlet Gray Financial, is always available to help you with any financial concerns you might have. It's just a matter of emailing us sgfinancial@osu.edu, or I'll put a scheduling link at the very end of this presentation if you'd prefer to sit down with a coach one-on-one to either have a discussion generally about your strategy to live off campus, or if you're just like, I'd like to learn a little bit more about debt repayment or investing. Those are things we can certainly help with and answer your questions very specifically one-on-one. So, I think being a college student financially is difficult, right? You have big financial obligations to the university for your living expenses, for tuition. You also have a very seasonal and busy lifestyle, right? Your students primarily, you might work, but your income is kind of seasonal. You get maybe you get your refund check at the beginning of the semester. You work over the summer. You work very part-time. And so there's a lot of seasonality to your financial life, and that calls for a lot more management than maybe when you're graduated and get the same paycheck every other week. That's very easy. It's challenging when you're a college student, especially so when you're moving from living on campus to living off campus. Because when you live on campus, pretty much all your expenses affiliated with room and board and the food you eat are taken care of by paying the university for those things. And certainly you might buy groceries or snacks or have other expenses, but a lot of the day-to-day spending you'll have are taken care of in that one transaction. Once you move off campus, it calls for a lot more intentional money management, because it's not simply writing a big check to the university once a year. It's writing a check to your landlord monthly, and then managing maybe a shared budget for things in your home, paying your utilities, going grocery shopping. Calls for a lot more strategy and a lot more thought about your actual financial plan. So I'd encourage you, as you're thinking about moving off campus, to spend some time talking, thinking about what your plan is, talking to your support network to see what they think might be good for you. If you have roommates, being upfront and honest with them about what you expect from each other, so that you have clear expectations from that perspective. Rent is 100% the biggest cost you're going to have on a monthly basis. So making sure you have a reasonable rent amount given your income and assets is important, because you're stuck with that for 12 months, which certainly is a challenge for many students. So, the way I encourage students to think about their income, especially in the context of getting a refund, is how you're going to use that over the course of a semester, right? When you move off campus, if you've been receiving financial aid to cover your room and board, you can generally use that to live off campus as well. But instead of that money going to the university, it's going to flow back to you. And so you might receive hundreds or thousands of dollars back from the university that you have to make last over the duration of the semester. So I always encourage students to budget out their income as much as they do expenses, to ensure that lump sum they get lasts for the entirety of the semester. And, it's not mid-November and you're out of money, and that's stressful and you're stressed out of it taking finals. It's just a situation, we don't like to avoid. So figure out kind of what your expenses are, and then figure out what income you have. And so this might be, obviously, getting a job will help your income situation. Maybe you have money you made over the summer. Maybe you have a financial aid refund that you're going to use to cover your living expenses. In either case, you need to make sure that money you're drawing from over the course of the semester is sustainable, right? Because if you run out of money, that's a situation we'd all like to avoid. You can also consider working over the summer if you haven't been doing that. If you save some of that money, it's an asset for you to use over the school year to ensure that you are consistently able to pay your bills and you're not in a unsustainable financial situation, which can be extremely stressful. So when I work with students, I make something like this, which is just very simply, how much money are you making in terms of wages? If you receive some support from your family, make sure to include that as well. Then you have financial aid. what is my distribution of that financial aid to myself, maybe from savings account to a checking account on a monthly basis, so that, again, I'm not running out of money at the end of the semester and kind of putting myself in a challenging financial situation. When it comes to managing your expenses off campus, I think it's helpful to think a little bit about the kind of expense types you'll face when you're living off campus. And so the easiest one to start with, if you're thinking about budgeting, is what I would call fixed expenses. These are things that are just the same each month because you are contractually and practically obligated to have them. An extremely obvious fixed expense for you will be rent, which is obviously what you have to pay monthly to live in a place. You're also going to have internet and cable. It's going to vary based on the package you get and also the number of roommates you have. And I would highly recommend also taking renter's insurance, which is a policy that covers not the building, but your physical belongings, right? So in the event of theft or fire or a flood, your computer gets snatched up or gets wet because your roof has a leak, it's going to be covered with your insurance policy. It tends to be quite inexpensive, especially if you can bundle it with a family's insurance policy, or maybe you have an auto insurance policy. I'd pay $15-ish a month for renter's insurance, which is pretty inexpensive considering it covers a lot of my physical belongings. You have a lot of options in the off-campus area, many of which are very expensive and some of which are pretty cheap, right? I'd encourage everybody to live in a place they feel physically secure and safe. But there are a lot of very new and shiny places to live on High Street. But if you go a block farther, there are many less shiny, but equally fine places to live that cost a lot less. So being strategic about your rent is important because that is going to be your largest expense. And if that's smaller, you really have a lot more financial flexibility to meet the rest of your obligations. Renter's insurance, again, going to vary, pretty inexpensive. And then internet or cable, depending on how many roommates you have and what package you get. I think I pay $160, but I split it with 3 other people, so it ends up being $40 a month. Just doable. Variable expenses are those that you're going to spend money on each month, but the way in which you purchase them, or where you purchase them from, or what you purchase is highly variable, right? You have a lot of control over these in the short run. These are things like groceries. If you go out to eat, where are you going out to eat? Entertainment. What do you do for fun? Clothing, potentially, gasoline if you in your car, and things like utilities. So this is if you need to spend less money in the short run, this is where I encourage students to look. Groceries are a perfect example of this because not only can you choose where you shop in terms of groceries, you can choose what you buy when you're there. So Whole Foods is an extremely expensive organic grocer on on Lane Avenue in Upper Arlington. You can go there and spend your whole paycheck there, right? It costs a ton of money. You can go to Aldi, which is a discount German grocer. There's one in Upper Arlington, and there's one in near 71 in Hudson that costs a lot less money. You can go to Kroger, which is a middle price grocery store. And if you're a Kroger, you can buy the organic fancy stuff. You can buy rice and beans, which cost a lot less. You can really have a lot of control over your spending in this area to spend less money if you need to. A lot of this is lifestyle stuff. I would encourage you to look at the university to see what resources you can use to help offset some of your living expenses. So you pay the student activity fee, and so you should definitely see if OUAB or the discount tickets program or anything like that has free resources or cheap resources you can use to offset some of the stuff you would have otherwise paid out of pocket. In this category, there's really a lot from the university that you can use to help live a little cheaper if you need to. Variable expenses are going to be that variable. A lot of this comes down to lifestyle, right? If you choose to learn how to cook and you cook with your roommates and you buy in bulk, you can live it super cheap from a groceries perspective. If you choose to eat out for most of your meals, it's going to cost a lot more. And again, these things all come down to like what your lifestyle is, what you like doing. I would also encourage you to make sure you're budgeting for the things that you enjoy doing. If you have a hobby, if you love going out with your friends and going to get dinner, that's a high value thing for you. You should definitely do it. Obviously, there are trade-offs here, right? But look at the things that are important to you and make sure they're included in your budget, because it kind of goes beyond just simply being financially well. Like, if you're going out and connecting with your friends, have a great social life, that could be awesome for your emotional health as well. The final expense category that's out there is what I would call irregular expenses. These are things that pop up maybe annually or sometimes completely randomly that are kind of difficult to predict and plan for. And they tend to be pretty painful financially. So, I own a car, right? Some of you may own a car. And so you know that every 6 months you need to go get an oil change. That's pretty predictable. It's not that expensive, though, I don't love paying for an oil change. But every once in a while, you need a brake job or you have a significant issue with your car, then that might cost hundreds or thousands of dollars. And so that's an example of a regular expense that comes up that you're never like, oh, you always expect this is going to happen at some point, but you can never pinpoint exactly when it happens. So suppose the fixed expenses with their monthly, these can be really hard to predict and that's hard to plan for financially. So other examples might be medical or dental care. If you're seeing your a doctor at student health services and have a $20 copay, boy, that's easy enough to plan for. But if you break your ankle and need surgery, that could cost a lot more. I'm going to talk a little bit about the costs you'll face when you actually move off campus, the process of actually moving. But there are going to be a lot for that, both in the application process and the actual physically moving into your space process. If you like to travel to and from home for vacations, for trips for fun, that's something that's a regular expense for sure. And then put in electronics here, like need a new phone every couple of years, spill water in your laptop, that kind of stuff happens. So to encourage you to think in the context of your budget, how to cope with these things. They're going to be a little different for everybody. So there's kind of a few things I'd encourage you to do. One, if you're able, have some savings and cash available to you to help ease, the challenges you might face if one of these unexpected expenses pops up. Another is to be proactively planning for them. Automotive repair is a great example because it's going to happen. There's just, if you own a car long enough, you're gonna pay to fix it. So think about reasonably how much should I expect to pay to fix my car for the next year? And you can do some research on this. And then just save that amount monthly, right? Just put that as a fixed expense in your budget. Transfer your $30 or $40 a month rather over to your over your savings account so that when that happens, you're able to deal with it. It's not one of those situations where you're making a decision about my car's fixed. My car's broken. I drive my car to work. What do I do now? Is it credit card? Is it, calling my friends and asking for a loan? If possible, it's best just to avoid that situation altogether. So in the context of moving off campus, there are a lot of irregular expenses you'll want to consider. On the front end, you should be prepared during the application process when you're speaking to landlords to pay a application fee that might cover things like a background check and a credit check. You should expect to pay a security deposit, which is the money the landlord holds to ensure that in the event that the property is damaged, they're able to be made whole. And then some landlords will request prepaid rent. So that might be the first month of rent upfront, might be the last month of rent upfront. But there's going to be large amounts of money relative to your income in the current situation. When you actually move in, you're going to pay for a lot of stuff. You're maybe going from living in the residence hall, which is obviously a very small space, where you don't have to provide a bed or a desk, stuff like that, to physically having to furnish a space, which is very expensive, with a kitchen and bathroom supplies and cleaning supplies, furniture for your common space, stuff like that. There are a lot of upfront costs. So make sure you're coordinating with your roommates to see how can we do this as cheaply as possible. And then let me tell you, if you drive around the off-campus area when students are moving out, you're going to see a lot of very free and okay furniture that you can potentially use. And everybody's moving out. A lot of cheap stuff out there. You can be clever in the way that you furnish your apartment. Make it as cheap as possible. The other thing is actually moving, right? If you're coming from maybe out of state or from Cleveland and you're maybe taking some furniture you already had, you got to get it there, right? And so U-Haul is not free. And so actually physically moving furniture you have into your place can be a significant expense that you'll want to prepare for. So the final thing we have here are some tips and tricks on making this as smooth as possible. I always encourage students who are kind of in a new lifestyle to figure out exactly what your new expenses are going to be. You're going to have a lot more financial transactions that you're responsible for. And so using an app or writing it down on a piece of paper or making a spreadsheet of all your expenses for the first few months is going to be really edifying to help you understand exactly how much money do I need on a monthly basis given my new lifestyle. You might find that it's a lot. You might find that it's less than you thought. But it's hard to make a budget when you're just guessing at how much money you're spending on a monthly basis. Definitely be upfront with your roommates about how you plan to manage shared expenses and community items, and like how you plan to clean your common areas. So that's not really a financial consideration, but it's just generally a good idea. Are you going to have shared milk? Are you going to have shared rice that you buy in bulk, right? And then as far as your utility payments, who's going to cover them? And how and when are you going to pay each other for that, right? It might be easiest from a reimbursement standpoint for one person to cover all of your shared expense items. So your cable bill, your gas bill, your electric bill, but that person's going to have might have additional financial obligations monthly that they might run out of money because, that's an additional $400 or $500 on their total monthly budget. So, but if you're sharing them too, get a little tricky with person A is covering cable, person B is covering gas, person C is covering your electric bill. So to make sure you have a system to make sure that you're compensating one another in a way that everybody feels good about. And then, who's going to clean the common area, is a good way to head off conflict in a shared living situation and make sure your place stays nice and clean. I cannot recommend Student Legal Services enough. If you're not already familiar, that is a law firm that represents Ohio State students exclusively. And so they do the range of things from criminal representation to civil representation to helping you out with your landlord, right? So, I would highly recommend before you sign a lease, you have Student Legal Services review it. It is free for you if you've paid your Student Legal Services fee for a year, which is $15, which is an incredible value. And you can find a time with them. They'll sit down and read through your lease, help you understand your obligations as somebody who's signing a legal contract with a landlord, but also help you understand that what's in there that might not be actually legally enforceable, which is a unfortunately common thing out there. And if your landlord is maybe dragging their feet on fixing whatever issue you might have in there, you're in an unsafe living condition, they're going to help you with that too, on the enforcement side of things. And they work exclusively with students. They're super helpful. I cannot recommend them enough. And finally, if it's possible for you, would highly recommend building a financial cushion by setting aside a few months of your expenses and savings to ensure that when things come up, you can deal with them in a way that's not financially stressful for you, right? Your car breaks down, you lose your job. If you have a few months of your expenses in cash, it gives you some breathing room to cope with those unexpected expenses that it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when they come up. And so you're able to kind of persevere through it without being distracted by the things you want to be thinking about, your academic life, your social life. It can be really not any fun. So finally, my program, Scarlet and Gray Financial. And if you want to meet with the financial coach, we are more than happy to sit with you and help you figure out what you can expect from an expense standpoint off campus. And so we'll literally sit down and go item by item and make a budget for you from income to irregular expenses and help in the context of your financial goals. We make appointments both via Zoom and also in person. My office is in the RPAC in B130, the Wellness Center. Or if you just like to learn more about topics, so if you're like, oh, I've heard a lot about investing, or I should get a credit card or I shouldn't get a credit card, we'll sit down and just talk to you about these subjects. It's a student I've trained extensively, who really gets these things and can explain to you in a way that's relatable because they're students, and helpful to you given your individual situation. So in order to make an appointment, go to go.osu.edu/yourfinances. If you have a one-off question or like you can't find a time that works for you, please just email sgfinancial@osu.edu. I manage that inbox along with a few other students, so we can get back to you pretty quickly. But best of luck in your journey to off-campus living. It is a fun time. I really enjoyed my time living in a pretty gross place off campus. Those are some very good times with some friends I still have to this day. but make sure you're doing some planning to make sure you get there seamlessly from a financial perspective. So happy to help. Feel free to reach out to SG Financial if there's anything we can assist with.